Let me start with the breaking news about the Senate in this markup on the Senate side. Senator Orrin Hatch putting in a repeal of the individual mandate of Obamacare. They say, again, as Martha said, saves $338 billion over 10 years. Why is it not in the House plan?
Well, we didn't want to complicate tax reform and make it harder than it otherwise would be. And in fact, it was really the Senate was the issue. So we're now seeing if the Senate has the votes to actually repeal the individual mandate. As you know, the House did this already. The House passed our health care bill back in May, which repealed the individual mandate. So we're on record in favor of this. I obviously think it's a bad mandate. It's cranking up health care prices. We're making people buy something they don't want or can't afford. So obviously we're in favor of repealing the individual mandate, but we didn't want to needlessly complicate the passage of tax reform, given we did not have the votes before to get this through the Senate. So we want to see the Senate go first and see if they can get that done, and then we'll discuss whether or not it gets included at the end.
Two things. One is you think you have the votes now with the plan that you have. That's a question. And two, explain to people how that comes together with a Senate plan and a House plan.
It's basic civics, like I'm a Bill on Capitol Hill. Remember that show?
Sure do.
Sure.
So those of you who are kind of my age, you hardly remember what I'm talking about. The House passes a bill. In tax laws, the House has to go first. It's in the Constitution. So the House Ways and Means Committee wrote this bill, passed it out of its committee. That's the regular order process. We bring it to the floor this week. We pass it. Then the Senate takes that bill up, and then they put their bill in it, because that's the process. So the Senate is now starting their committee process this week, and then after Thanksgiving, they'll bring theirs to the floor. So the House will pass a bill, the Senate will pass a bill, and then we go into what we call a conference committee. And that is a joint committee between the House and the Senate to reconcile the differences, to come up with a final unified version bill, and then pass that in both chambers. That becomes law. That is basically the legislative process. This is no different, and that's how this process will continue. So what we are just now starting in Congress is the beginning of this legislative process, and it's a work in progress. The House has some differences than the Senate bill, like you just said. That's to be expected. That's always the case. We'll pass our different bills, and then we'll reconcile those differences and bring a common bill.
But you have the votes for your plan.
Yeah, we feel great about where we are.
So one of the bones of contention that you've heard a lot about in the last few days are certain scenarios where some taxpayers looked at the plan and they say, no, there's not a tax cut in this for everybody. One of those scenarios was written up in the Washington Post. There are others similar to it. Somebody in Atlanta, Georgia, a couple in Atlanta, Georgia. The husband's a police officer. The wife is a tax manager. They have $180,000 combined income, mortgage, 3 kids, daycare, college. They say that they're in that scenario, they're going to end up paying more. What do you say to that?
I have a hard time believing that particular scenario, but be happy to look at that. But here's the point, and the analysis is really clear. There's been a number of analysis done. This tax bill for the average taxpayer in every income group gets a tax cut. This tax bill for average taxpayers in every state gets a tax cut. Now, I'm sure that there are going to be people out there, especially much higher income people, who can utilize all the loopholes that are out there, that can hire an accountant or a tax lawyer to utilize a bunch of loopholes that are in the tax code. And by losing some of those loopholes, they may not be as well off. But the whole purpose of this is to take away those loopholes so you can lower everybody's tax rates across the board. The whole purpose of this is to take away loopholes and just give everybody a general tax cut.
Well, let me ask you this.
So the point is every income group, on average, gets a tax cut under this bill.
Who is in the much higher income bracket? Are you talking $100,000 or $200,000?
No, people have above $1 million. I'm talking about people who are extremely wealthy.
I know we're going to get to some of those.
The people who are very, very wealthy utilize lots of different tax loopholes. Let me put it this way. 70% of Americans already itemize their deductions. They just take they don't itemize their deductions. Right. They take the standard deduction. That means 30% itemize, use those loopholes. That's the highest income earners in America. With this plan, 90% of Americans will be able to use the standard deduction. You can fit your taxes. I'm going to bring a couple props out literally on a postcard. Go to fairandsimple.gop. By doubling the standard deduction, that basically says 9 out of 10 taxpayers don't have to use itemized deductions. They can just take the standard deduction and they get lower taxes. So we're talking about the 10% of Americans remaining who are very high income earners.
Who pay 70% of the taxes in the country.
Absolutely. No dispute there, but who may have some disproportionate amount of loopholes that they may not get their taxes lowered. But what we're doing is we're lowering everybody's tax rates. We're saying for that high income earner, more of your income is taxed at a lower rate. And more importantly, that's the people who own big, successful businesses, and we're cutting tax rates on businesses across the board.